Elizabeth at A Literary Princess, and today I have my December wrap-up for you. I really went out with a bang for December of 2023. I read 13 books, and yes, 2 of them are short stories and like 7 of them are children's books, but I still felt really good about how much I read. I also read a really chunky biography, so, you know, it evened out. This was just such a great reading month for me. I participated in the Remember December Rereadathon, which was hosted by Anne from Anne Novella, Elizabeth from Bookings and Books, Roz from Scally Dandling About the Books, Erin Facer, Ollie from Criminolly, and Shelley Swearingen. I think I got them all. And I had such a lovely time participating in this rereadathon. I read a single series, which we will get to as we talk. And it was just lovely. But I also read a lot of new to me books that I just really enjoyed. This was a month with no least favorites and nothing below a 3.5 star, which is like really good. So let's jump in. First up, we have actually 2 short stories that I'll kind of talk about together, even though they have been counted as separate entities. And these are The Executor and The Rector by Margaret Oliphant. These are the first 2 stories in her Chronicles of Carlingford series. All of the rest of the series is novels. But The Executor and The Rector kind of set the scene and introduce the major characters of the later novels. The Executor follows, it's about an inheritance, and a woman dies and leaves her money not to the family that she was expected to, but actually to her daughter nobody knew she had. And if the Executor is unable to find her daughter within, I don't remember if it's a year or 3 years, but it's a certain time frame. But then the money goes to him, which is a moral dilemma for him. And it is the story of what then happens. I gave this a 3.5 star rating. I liked it, and it sets up several characters within the Carlingford universe, I guess you could call it. But I wanted more from it. Like, I was like, I want it to be longer and more in depth, which is interesting because Margaret Oliphant later used the whole setup and expanded it into a novel called The Brownlows. She removed it from the Carlingford universe and changed the names like very slightly, like Mr. Brown becomes Mr. Brownlow. It's like, okay. But so, and then expands it, which is really interesting, and I'm very excited to read The Brownlows at some point, because that's what I wanted more. That was why it was slightly lower than a 4 star for me, is because I was just like, I just want more from it. So The Rector, I gave 4 stars. This follows the new rector of, now Carlingford has multiple churches. I don't really remember, but he's the new rector of Carlingford. And he ends up kind of realizing that maybe this isn't the job for him, because the perpetual curate of St. Roke's Church, I believe, seems to be doing such a better job than him, and he just doesn't feel like he belongs. This is a theme that we actually see later on in the series in Salem Chapel with Arthur Vincent, who's a dissenting minister. So it's interesting, we get it from both the Church of England and the dissenting church. And I enjoyed this very much. Again, it sets up some of the characters who we're going to be seeing in the Perpetual Curate. And I gave it 4 stars. I had a lot of fun. Again, I'm like, it could have been longer. But it was still a really good short story. Next up, we have one that I read on audiobook. This is Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey. This is, I guess, kind of like a mystery thriller, but also horror. And it focuses on Vera, who has to go home for the first time in a really long time to care for her dying mother. The thing is, Vera's father was a serial killer. And this house is where he killed all these people. The town absolutely hates them. And so being back in this house is bringing back all these memories. But there also seems to be something that could be haunting the house. Some weird stuff is going on. The atmosphere in this book is so good. And the audiobook narrator, who I need to look up, hold on, I feel like I do this a lot. A. Sands, apparently, is the audiobook narrator. Wonderful job. Really fantastic job. And I was very into this. I was incredibly engaged. Wanted to know what happens. There was one point where I was like, oh no, I can't look, because I knew it was like gonna be something bad happening, and I put it down for a few days. But ultimately, I was very engaged with figuring out what was going on here. What's the true story behind Vera's childhood and her serial killer father? And then the end got really, really weird. I didn't dislike it, but it was so far outside of anything I would have guessed that I was just kind of like, what? So I ultimately gave this 4 stars. I did really like it. The end was almost a little too weird for me, but I see what Gailey was doing. So I do highly recommend it if you're into kind of the mystery, thriller, horror type stuff. It's a good read. Really well paced, really just well done. The end is just very strange. Now we get into the series that I reread for Remember December, and that is the Chronicles of Narnia. I have read the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and Prince Caspian as an adult, but the rest I had not read since I was how old would I have been in 2005? 11 or 12, I think. I can't math. I don't want to math. I don't want to know that math right now. But yeah, so while I'm like feel very familiar with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and with Prince Caspian, and even with Voyage of the Dawn Treader because the movie came out and I've seen the movie a few times, the others I'd kind of forgotten most of it. So this was such a treat for me. So I read them in publication order, meaning I started with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe rather than in chronological order, which is how they are now numbered. That would start with The Magician's Nephew because it happens the earliest in the timeline of Narnia. But The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was published first. And I think the reading order is better when it's in the publication order, to be perfectly honest. I am going to have a whole video talking about rereading the Chronicles of Narnia as an adult, so I'm not going to say a whole lot about these here, but I will go through them and tell you my ratings. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was 5 stars. This was such a delight. I started crying as I was reading the first page, for no reason, just because of the nostalgia. And that's having read it as an adult. I read it a few years ago. So, but even then, even though I have reread it since being a child, it still just hits me and I feel like a child again. Absolutely 5 stars. Marvelous. Next in the publication order comes Prince Caspian, and I give this 4.5 stars. So none of the books really quite did it for me as much as The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. That was a gold standard, and none of the others quite reached that, but Prince Caspian is pretty good too, as are most of them. And we have The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. I thought this was going to be my second favorite because I remembered it being my second favorite from the first time I read it, but it's actually not. It's probably my 3rd or 4th favorite. but I do really enjoy it. It's just a lot more episodic than the other books, which is kind of a different way for these stories to be told. I took a quick break from Narnia to read a book that my friend lent me, and this is Assembly by Natasha Brown. This follows an unnamed narrator who is a Black British woman dating a white upper-class man, and she is going to his parents' estate for a party. It takes place over the course of one day, and it's very stream of consciousness. There have been a lot of parallels drawn to Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, which I definitely agree with. I really enjoyed this. It was intense. It's very intense considering it's like tiny, but there's a lot to unpack here. I actually wish that I had known about this last year because I think I would have liked to have taught it in my British literature survey as part of the postmodern unit, especially because it pairs so nicely with Mrs. Dalloway, which we did read. So highly recommend checking this out. Because it's this kind of stream of consciousness, it gets a little bit hard to grasp what's going on sometimes, which is just how stream of consciousness is. So I gave this 4 stars. Very good, very intense. And then we go back to the rest of Narnia. We have The Silver Chair, which is now my second favorite of the series. I didn't remember any of this. I remembered the beginning with them at school and being drawn into Narnia, and then the rest was like, which is really funny because as I was reading it, I realized that I saw the BBC, I guess it's a TV adaptation, despite the fact that I had not seen the BBC adaptations of the rest of the series. And I was shown this before I read the books. So I don't really know what was going on there and why my parents decided to start with The Silver Chair. But they did. So that was kind of fun to be remembering that as I was reading. I'm like, oh yeah, that was weird. Anyway, really enjoyed this. I enjoyed all of them, that goes without saying. But yeah, this is my second favorite of the series now. We then have The Horse and His Boy, which chronologically, when they're ordered, is the 3rd book because it takes place during Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy's time as kings and queens of Narnia. And it follows a boy named Shasta from the neighboring country of Calormen? You know, some of these pronunciations are... So I gave this book 4 stars because the story is incredibly engaging. However, the racism is really uncomfortable. And I was moving between 3 and 4 for most of this. I was like, I don't know. I ultimately landed on 4 because I really did enjoy the story, and I think this is one of the tighter stories out of the series. But yeah, the racism's really uncomfortable. And I'll be talking more about that in my full video on the series. We then have The Magician's Nephew, which chronologically is first, but it makes so much more sense to just read it second to last. And I'll be talking about my first experience with the series and how I think reading in chronological order doesn't work in my full-length video. But yeah, I give this 4 stars. It was much easier to read the second time around than it was as a kid, starting with this is my introduction to the series instead of starting with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It is not my favorite. The interesting thing is, so this shows the creation of Narnia. So we spend a fair amount of time in our world in this book, and I kind of didn't like that. And that's why it's 4 stars. I don't remember if I said Prince Caspian, Voyage, and The Silver Chair are all 4.5 stars. And then we have the end, the last battle, which I had similar issue with The Horse and His Boy, the racism's really bad. Yikes. Wow. Wow. I also didn't like that the human children, like from our world, do not actually come in until about halfway through. And I think that kind of made it a little bit more hard, like, I don't know, just not quite as engaging as some of the other ones. So for a really long time, this book was like sitting at 3 stars for me until the end. Which I'm not going to talk about here because I'm going to talk about it in the full-length video where I will be giving spoilers. I don't really want to give spoilers in case you don't know, but the end made me cry. This is kind of dark. This is really dark for a children's book. But the ending moved me emotionally very much. So I ultimately gave this 4 stars. The racism is still really friggin' uncomfortable. And I just completely forgot a book. Go me. So in between Assembly and The Silver Chair, so kind of my little break from Narnia there, I read The Doctor's Family by Margaret Oliphant, which was the 3rd work in the Chronicles of Carlingford, the 1st novel. And I gave this 5 stars. It is one of my top books of the year. Spoiler for that video. It follows Edward Ryder, who we are introduced to in The Executor, as he's dealing with his alcoholic brother just showing up and mooching off him, and then his brother's wife, children, and sister-in-law that he did not know existed show up on his doorstep. It was a great story. Nettie is a 5 out of 5 character. She is amazing. She is the sister-in-law who Edward ultimately falls in love with. But I loved this book. It was such a good time. And now we come to the last book of 2023, which was George Eliot, A Life by Rosemary Ashton. So as part of my George Eliot project, I wanted to read a biography of Eliot. I didn't really know a lot about her life prior to this, other than I knew she had a relationship with George. You'd think I'd look up how to pronounce his name because I've literally done this in another video too. It's spelled Lewes. I don't know if it's Lewes or Lewis. Somebody please tell me. But I knew she had a relationship with him. He was married, but they lived together as husband and wife anyway. But that was all I knew. So reading this gave me such wonderful context for reading her works, because even though Eliot's books are not like autobiographical really in any way, she does draw on aspects of her life. Scenes of Clerical Life and Adam Bede all draw heavily from the area that she grew up in as a child, to the point where some of the stories in Scenes of Clerical Life are literally stories that she heard about people and she just made it fiction. And like people were able to recognize themselves. And then Mill and the Floss is probably her most autobiographical because it deals with the contentious relationship between a brother and sister. So I got to learn about her relationship with her brother Isaac, which really started to break down while she was still living at home and she refused to go to church because she lost faith. And then it broke down even more when she began her relationship with Lewis, however you pronounce his name, because obviously being with a married man is frowned upon. Especially in the Victorian period, and they're much harsher on a woman than they are on a man. So Eliot wasn't invited places, people didn't visit her, it was very isolating for her. So this was just such an interesting look to understanding her books. And it took us through the writing process of each of her novels. She was a very insecure writer. Really couldn't take criticism at all. And it was interesting to see her correspondence with John Blackwood and how he kind of had to maneuver to give her criticism so that the book could be better, but without hurting her feelings so much that she'd stop writing. It was very interesting. I had a great time with this. This is my first biography of Eliot, so I don't know how it would compare to others. There are a few more that I would like to read, but I ultimately thought it was very good. I gave it 4 stars. So that was my December wrap up. Let me know down in the comments below. Have you read any of these books? What did you think? What did you read in December? What was your favorite book that you read? It has been great chatting with you. I will see you soon. Bye.